All right, so it's being recorded. So let me do this. Okay, so basically in this chapter, what we're looking at is percentages. That's what we're looking at now. So again, what is a percent? Well, a percent really just means per 100. I mean, if you were to take apart this word, you could probably see that as well. Per cent, right? Per, that's over here also. Cent is similar to like 1 to 100. 1 cent, 100 of those is $1. A century is 100 years, that kind of thing. So that's what percent means. And when we have, this is part of the definition, but when we have B percent, B is just a number. It could be 10, 2, whatever. Really what you have then is B over 100. Kind of like what we saw with conversions. When you have per, that's like a fraction. So we have B over 100. And if you think about a decimal, as a decimal, this is the same as moving the decimal 2 spaces to the left, when you divide by 100. When you have B percent, right? B percent, that's the same as B divided by 100. That's really what this is trying to say here. B percent is really the same as B divided by 100, where again, B is just a number. And another implication for that, let me make it more explicit, is this. If you want to convert a percent to a decimal, so like if you want to go from B percent to a decimal, you could divide by 100, or in terms of the decimal, you could just move the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. You can move the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. And if you want to convert a decimal to a percent, right? So if you want to go the other way, then you basically do the opposite, meaning you would move the decimal point 2 spaces to the right, and then of course you add the percent sign. That's what this symbol here is. It's a percent sign. It's kind of a funny looking symbol, I know. Just to help illustrate that, here's an example. For instance, let's suppose you have 1 over 5, right, which is a fifth. As a decimal, that's the same as 0.2, which of course is 20%. So it's the same as 0.2, which is 20%, okay? And again, because 0.2, to convert that to a percent, right, down here, I can move that 2 spaces to the right and get a 0, and we put a 0 there. To go the other way, right, to convert a percent to a decimal, I would move the decimal 2 spaces to the left. That's how I would get from here to here. Because of the equal sign, I'm just trying to illustrate these 2 rules. Same thing over here. If you go 0.98, how do you convert that to a decimal? Again, you could move the decimal 2 spaces to the right to convert it to a percent. So I'm trying to illustrate the rule here. To go the other way, to go from a percent to a decimal, you can move the decimal 2 spaces to the left, which is this dividing by 100. That's all I'm trying to show here. All right. Okay, so that's the notion. And this also comes up as well. This is especially useful when you're dealing with word problems. Basically, when you have a percent, in a sense, you have part of something, a part of some whole. For instance, if you hear like in the news or something, it turns out in Oneonta, 25% of the town said they would vote for person A in an election. I mean, what does that really mean? 25% of a town, right? 25% is part of the town, right? That's what a percent is. It's part of something, part of a whole. And that's really what this is saying. or this if you want. Percent also, you can write it as a decimal, namely, well, actually, excuse me, you have to write it as a decimal to use this equation. If you don't write it as a decimal, what you can do is write it as a fraction over 100. I mean, if you went back to this slide, right, as a percent, you could write it as the number over 100. That's also what these equations are saying. Well, this one really. Okay. Or again, you can write it as a decimal. And also from here, if you were to multiply both sides by whole, you would get this. And this will also come in handy when we do examples. You'll see, for instance, what is a certain percent of something. Well, you'll see when we do examples. But basically, you're going to end up multiplying. And again, percent here is a decimal. This is also useful. Namely, you could think of a percent as is over of. So you can also think of a percent as is over of. And this is also even more useful than this in word problems. You might see, for instance, okay, what is, 25% of a number? There it's a little bit easier to see, to solve the problem using is and of. And of course, just like above, is basically is your part, of is your whole, so you can just multiply as well. Okay, so again, these are just, I don't know if it's really, I guess it's really part of the definition technically, but they are very useful. So, I mean, the one advantage to writing percent as a fraction over 100, that is, right? Then you would have a proportion, if you prefer that way. So, all right. But that's what the definition is, sort of. So, anyway, let's move on and consider some examples. So let's say we want to know, what is 28% of 90? So again, what we can use is we can really use either one of these. But since we have is there, you might want to use this one. Although maybe I shouldn't have said that because we actually don't know what is, right? They give you the percent. They say of a number, right? So basically they give you of, which is 90. The percent is here. I just wrote it as a decimal. The is unknown, right? So what do? We have to figure out what is. The is basically our x. And really, just like this is what I was trying to say in the previous slide, in the end, you're just multiplying, okay? You're just multiplying. That's all you're doing, okay? You have is equals 0.28 times 90. And that's how we get 25.2. So again, you're just multiplying. I mean, algebraically, that's what you're doing from here to here. So for the next one here, we have 45% of 1,250, right? So same idea, right? The is what we're looking for. We know our percent, that's here, written as a decimal, of the number, of is here. The is on top over here. That's our is. Okay? So because of that, we can solve for is, and that's really what I'm doing here. I know the algebra I'm kind of skipping over, but hopefully you should be able to see that you just cross multiply. Yeah, at least I hope everyone can see that. Okay. And for the last one, this one's a little weird in that it's 200%, right? Usually you might not expect the percent to be 200%, but let's just see what happens. So if I did the same process, which, of course I would, right? I mean, it's essentially asking the same kind of question as here. What is 200% of 150? Well, if I convert this to a decimal, we get 2. As you can see, we have is over of, right? The of is given. We have to figure out what is, right? They say what is, then the percent of, then the number. Okay. So from here, what do we get? Well, we have our is, we cross multiply just like before. 2 times 150, which is 300. So this is interesting in that 200% of something, right? That's actually twice the amount. I mean, 100% of something, right? That means you have the amount itself. Like 100% on the test, right? You got everything. 200% would be double. If I asked for 300%, then instead of 2, I would have a 3 here. So I really hope you get the idea from that. That's this example. Now, I want to do more examples with taxes, but let me just get the recording. So let me stop this.